is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Unspoiled, the book club, covering The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. In this book, I feel like I came home. Welcome to Unspoiled. Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Natasha.
I'm Jamie.
And you all may remember Jamie from the doomed Gone Girl podcast that did not get recorded properly, unfortunately, but we did what we could. But yeah, I'm really excited because I loved that book and I loved this book. So that's two that we've recorded together that I really liked. So that's a good record.
Did you like it? We did that one too.
I liked it less than these two, but I did. It's a troublesome book.
Mm-hmm.
So that one was a little all over the place. There were parts I loved and parts that I was like, why you do this?
Yeah,
so,
I get that.
So yeah, guys, I loved this book. I loved this book. What a lovely feeling. It's so nice. Like, there have been books that I really enjoyed reading, but this was different. This was, like I said, it felt familiar somehow. I don't know how to explain it. Do you have anything you wanted to? Because I know that you loved it too.
I did. I just thought it was so beautiful, and it was a world I wanted to be inside of.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that I could accurately picture some of the things that were described, because I feel like what I'm picturing just can't even live up.
Right, yeah. Yeah, there's an interview at the end that you said is not in your book.
It's not.
And I thought it was hysterical because I'm reading this and there's so much of this book. Now, somebody asked me just straight up, why did I love it on the book club page? And the main reason that I loved this is that this feels like somebody wrote a book and they had the same priorities that I do. I want things to be beautiful. I'm concerned with how things look. I like symmetry in terms of storytelling. I am much more invested in seeing a world like when it's something that's this spectacular than I am in necessarily like getting an incredibly intricate plot. And there's just such an emphasis on luxury, on seasonality, on ambiance that is so touching in this very specific way, because that's what my priorities are in life, period. Like, I am so concerned with that stuff. And so it felt like this person was writing and they had the same concerns and desires to make something gorgeous. And there is a lot of whimsy, but it never feels cutesy and a little too precious, you know?
Yeah. Even the tents that could possibly feel that way, like the cloud maze,
mm-hmm.
don't feel precious.
Mm-hmm.
They feel like they were made with love.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know any better way to explain it. Every time somebody goes into a different tent and it's described, it feels like that tent was made with love.
Mm-hmm.
And you just love everything in it with whoever it is that's experiencing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I read the very opening chapter to Owen because it's a really high impact chapter. And he said that it reminded him a little bit of Neil Gaiman. And I can see what he means, but there's an undercurrent to Neil Gaiman, even when he's being whimsical, that's sinister. There's always a vibe, like things are maybe just a little not okay, or they could be not okay. Like they could go right or left at the drop of a hat. And this consistently feels just solidly beautiful. And the plot manages to feel high stakes, despite the fact that they don't drop down into, oh, it's gritty, like ever. It still feels real. And it's just all it's all heightened. The whole world, even outside of the circus, feels heightened because they're able to locate these people that just don't make sense in terms of what they're able to do and include them in this. So let's get to the main plot here. The thing that I had mentioned at the beginning about the interview was that I was laughing because I was feeling this book so hard. And then at the end, when she's talking about her history, that she went to school for theater in college and then quit and did not finish. But she took a lot of classes on lighting and set design. And I'm like, okay. Like? And then she's like, and some of my favorite books growing up were The Egypt Game and Secret Garden. And I'm like, okay, like those were my favorites too. So it started to make a lot of sense once I read that. Why this just hit me so hard. Do you remember The Egypt Game?
I didn't know anybody other than me had read that book.
Oh my God, it was a hugely popular book.
I don't know anyone who's ever read it. I actually tried to track down a copy recently because I remember loving it so much. And I don't know what ever happened to my copy of it.
That was like, I probably reread that book like 15 times. I don't know what happened to mine either, but I don't know what happened to any of my property. That basically I've lost everything that I ever owned. So, but yeah, Zilpha Keatley Snyder was the author for those who are interested. And it is just a really fun, beautiful story. It
made me want to be magic. Like a Egyptologist when I don't know how old I was, 11 when I read that book. I really wanted to study Egypt. And when I went to the museum of, not the MoMA, the Met in New York, the first room I went into was the Egypt room. And I cried when I saw the part of the tomb that they had in that. Because I remembered everything from that book that I loved. And it was like I was actually seeing something from Egypt for the first time in real life. Aw. I didn't know anybody liked that book. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I love that feeling. I had somebody that I met in college who had read this book called The Little White Horse. And it's one of those that, like, when people who have read it, they're like, oh, because it's one of those books like this where it's just got this magic and this beauty to it. And it just sticks in your mind. But very few people seem to have read it, even though it was pretty popular and they made a movie out of it. It's still sort of something that doesn't get talked about much.
Yeah, I've never heard of that one.
Yeah, it's a fun one. I recommend it. It's very light, but it's just so pretty. So the name of the book, The Night Circus, there's a little part of me, circuses can be a little creepy. So I was a little bit worried about that. And the fact that it's the Night Circus, I was worried that it was going to be real creepy. I was honestly thinking that it might be like, just tinging on the edge of like the Nightmare Circus, something that's really kind of grotesque. And the way that it's described is so the circus appears in different cities and towns all over the world with no warning overnight in these fields. It's completely set up when people notice it, and then it completely is disappeared whenever they're done and headed to the next place with no actual scheduled route or anything. And we get introduced to it as this entity that already exists in the first person present. Not first person. What would one call it when you're saying you do this and you do that?
That's third person, is it?
Is it? I thought third person was John did such and such. Is it second person?
It may be second person then.
So that's how it opens. I just want to read this like first bit. The circus arrives without warning. No announcements precede it, no paper notices on downtown posts and billboards, no mentions or advertisements in local newspapers. It is simply there when yesterday it was not. The towering tents are striped in white and black, no golds and crimsons to be seen. No color at all, save for the neighboring trees and the grass of the surrounding fields. Black and white stripes on gray sky, countless tents of varying shapes and sizes, with an elaborate wrought iron fence encasing them in a colorless world. Even what little ground is visible from outside is black or white, painted or powdered or treated with some other circus trick. But it is not open for business, not just yet. And it continues on with everybody gathering around, waiting to buy tickets, finally stepping through. And the way that this opening ends is some in the crowd smile knowingly while others frown and look questioningly at their neighbors, because the sign just lit up. A child near you tugs on her mother's sleeve, begging to know what it says. "The Circus of Dreams," comes the reply. The girl smiles delightedly. Then the iron gates shudder and unlock, seemingly by their own volition. They swing outward, inviting the crowd inside. Now the circus is open. Now you may enter. And that's the opening before chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a gripping moment. I read that and I stopped and went back and I was like, oh, and listen. And I read the whole thing out loud to him. And what's a little difficult to get my head around is the way that the time jumps back and forth.
Yeah.
Because there'll be a chapter that takes place a year before the chapter that preceded it. So there's a point when someone is murdered and the next chapter is someone going to the circus, and I thought it was the next day. But then you find out it's been a year, which kind of threw me completely off. So we start off with this circus opening, but the first chapter is long before the circus has ever started. It's about 15 years before. And the overarching story and the reason for the existence of the circus is that there are two magicians, one named Prospero, the enchanter, his real name is Hector, and the other named Alexander, but we only know him as Alexander. Nobody else can seem to remember his name or seem to remember what he looks like or seem to remember what they talked about.
Yeah.
That was an interesting choice, because what they are meant to represent are two completely opposite ends of a spectrum. Prospero is out in public doing magic, real magic, but pretending that it's not real to make money.
Mm-hmm.
He loves the attention. He loves the fame. He loves the money. He loves the showmanship. He loves all of the glitz and glamour. And Alexander is the exact opposite, where he has actually created charms so that people forget him or don't notice him. And they are each convinced that their way is the way. And so they decide that they're going to have a contest, and they each choose a child to train. And Hector Prospero just happens to have a daughter that he didn't know about. And he binds her at the age of 4 in this contract with Alexander that she does not know, and Alexander's protege does not know, is a contest to the death, basically.
And he doesn't even have... He doesn't have a protege at this point. He
Exactly.
has to find one.
Yep. So basically, these two guys are complete bastards who are playing a game that potentially could destroy a lot of people, because the circus winds up being the venue for this competition. But the book spans at least 10 years. From, like, just for the circus itself, not including them growing up.
No, it at least gets to 13, or I think even after that, because they have a 13th anniversary, and then it goes a couple more years after that before things start to get figured out. So it's, when you say the circus is the venue, it makes it sound like they set up a circus so that the two of them can have a competition one night. But no, this is not like a beginning and end sort of thing.
the circus is the genesis for their stage, but neither of them go in exactly knowing who they are up against. They don't know who their opponent is right away. And one of them finds out long before the other, even though it doesn't really seem to be that much of an advantage. And they don't really know what it's going to take to win, because neither of them have been informed that it's when they die that it's over.
They also are never given rules, and they both ask, how am I supposed to compete if I don't know the rules? And both of their mentors basically tell them, you'll figure it out. Mm-hmm. And so they have to just keep creating these things just out of their own minds, not knowing, like, am I supposed to be reacting to something that they did, or am I supposed to just make something? And, is it supposed to be violent? Like, they don't know what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and the one rule that they are given is that they aren't allowed to interfere with each other's work. So this is interpreted differently by each of the mentors. Hector, whose daughter, Celia, is one of the competitors. Hector's a shitbag, and he winds up accidentally, like, basically pushing himself into the astral plane, basically, because he tried to disconnect himself from his body in order to gain immortality, and also because he was feeling old and not liking it. So he's stuck there in this weird in-between where he's like a ghost and can show up abruptly, and people can see him. Anybody can see him. But often people don't notice him, or it's like kind of tough to tell whether it's actually him or shadows. Mm-hmm. And he is watching while Celia grows and continues to compete, and is super critical of her, constantly telling her that she's disappointing. And he doesn't approve of the way that she is collaborating with other people, or even at times collaborating with her competitor when she finds out who he is, to build things together that are incredible. Mm-hmm. Because this contest, like you say, two magicians are in a contest together, and it does sound like it should be violent, or it sounds like they should be trying to create things to take each other out. Right. But what they've decided to do is basically create different tents at this circus with displays and worlds that people can walk through. And they're sort of dedicated to one another. Like, there's later on a wishing tree, and she created that in response to his ice garden. And it's a really interesting idea of, like, these two people whose abilities are so similar, but they were taught in such different ways, learning each other in order to create basically gifts for one another, but this being interpreted as a competition, because they've obviously turned this, what was intended here, into, as it's kind of described later, a love letter to each other.
Yeah. But
these men obviously did not intend for it to go down this way.
No, and there's a character who, it turns out later, we find out was the winner of their last contest. Mm-hmm. And she's part of the circus, and her ability is to be the most unbelievable contortionist you could ever hear of. Mm-hmm. There's that chapter where Bailey is watching her, and she, like, puts herself into a tiny little box.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
And she's covered in tattoos, and she talks about how she loved her competitor, and they did it in one place. They weren't in a public space like this. Mm-hmm. And it broke her heart to have to, neither of them wanted to win. So her competitor killed herself. Mm-hmm. And, like, that's horrible. And we don't know, like, was that the only other time that these two men pitted two exceptional children against each other? Or how many lives are on their heads for this?
It's definitely been at least 3 times before this because of something that Alexander says to Hector at one point about the last 3 of yours, how they ended the contest themselves.
Okay.
And Hector gets really upset and says that's not what's going to happen here, because for once, this is his actual child that he maybe cares a tiny bit about.
I don't think he cares about her at all.
Right? Like, I'm thinking mostly it's just that the fact that they caved like that is an embarrassment to him.
Yeah.
And yeah, what is her name? Tsutsiku? I have to find it.
I always, in my head, pronounce it Tsukiko.
Tsukiko. Okay. Tsukiko is, she says that these 2 men are so old that because they are meant to be having lived far beyond what a normal person would, that they have forgotten what emotions really are, and they have forgotten the kind of connections that people can develop between each other. And so they fail to understand that pitting them against each other as competitors, instead of making them want to beat one another, it forms a bond because they are each, basically their whole identity is wrapped around this competition. And so they learn to define who they are by measuring themselves against this other person, because they are taught and told that they're in a competition from as early as possible. Like I said, Celia was 4 years old. I think that he winds up deciding his name is Marco. I think he was a little older, like 7. So they grow from, basically as young as you can hold that kind of concept in your mind. They grow up knowing there's someone else out there who can do what they can do, that they are deeply connected to in this incredibly profound and important way. And these 2 men do not see how that can turn into a friendship inadvertently. And I really think that, what did we say? How did you say you said her name? Tsukiko?
Tsukiko, yeah.
I think Tsukiko was in love with this woman.
Yeah, I think so too.
That's exactly what wound up happening here with Marco and Celia. And apparently, Alexander, who chose Marco after he met Celia, chose Tsukiko after he met her competitor. So there's a kind of joke later on that Alexander should be a matchmaker because he chooses his opponents to be complementary to the initial challenger, but he does it so well that they wind up falling for each other frequently. This is not an isolated incident.
Marco was 9, by the way.
9, okay. So when I'm talking about this competition the way that I am, it makes it sound like this is a really kind of stark and brooding book, and it's so not. It's just that part of the story is. It's the one. It's the one thing that kind of juxtaposes the beauty and luxury of the rest of the story. Is this really pared down, sad dead end that the 2 main characters are facing together?
I expected it to be more antagonistic. Mm-hmm. Especially because Marco knew who she was, because he gets a job as the assistant to the man who they sort of manipulate to start this circus. Mm-hmm. And he's part of the planning of it all and controlling it all. And he meets this girl who he gets to be the fortune teller at the circus, and she's reporting back to him. He knows that Celia is his opponent. And so I kind of, when it got to that point where I knew he knew her and he had Isabel in there as a spy, I figured he was going to be trying to ruin anything Celia did or mess with her. And it just went in the complete opposite direction.
Mm-hmm. Well, when he first meets Celia, she is auditioning to be the illusionist, and he basically has a thunderclap moment where he sees her and immediately basically falls in love with her on sight. It's just like, holy shit, when he lays eyes on her. Then when she goes up and begins to perform, he realizes, oh, this is not like a magician. This is the one I'm against. And so he has this sort of like crisis where he runs home, and Isabel is the name of the fortune teller that he has gotten involved with and asked to become a part of the circus and also keep an eye on everything for him and an eye on Celia. And it's a really sad moment to me because as soon as he meets Celia, I'm like, oh, this is not going to be, because I anticipated it being like what you said until he meets her. And then I'm like, okay, this is really going to get ugly now because he's obviously in love with her already. But what does that mean for Isabel? And when he goes home, Isabel can see that there's something wrong. And she asks him, was she pretty? And he doesn't answer her. Mm-hmm. And there's a point later on where she asks, what did you wish for? When he talks about the wishing tree, and he doesn't answer. And each time she pulls cards from her tarot deck, and each time it basically points to he's in love with somebody else. But she won't see it. And despite the fact that he never says I love you to her, he never lies to her outright about having feelings for her. But he also doesn't tell her the truth because he wants her still in place to keep an eye on everything. So there's this really sad subplot of Isabel pining for him, missing him, waiting for him. And when he does show up, all he wants to do is question her about Celia, and he doesn't care about her at all. Yeah. And it was super painful to read. There's a point where he comes in, asks her all these questions, turns around and leaves as she's whispering, I missed you. And he's already out the door. Oh, it fucking killed me. Yeah. I felt so bad for her. And I really respected that the writer doesn't make her hate Celia.
Right, because Celia is always nice to her, and she understands, like, this woman has never done anything to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that could have been a really easy, like, cheap plot point, and she didn't do it.
Yeah. There are so many ways that this could have been expected, that the people involved could have done things that we've seen done in every other story, and she pivoted away from that every time.
Mm-hmm.
It was really amazing, and it just made the book so much richer. I think that the one negative thing in here is that these two assholes pitted these kids against each other.
Mm-hmm.
But everything else is beautiful up to a point until poor Chandrash starts losing his mind.
Yeah. So Chandras, everyone, is the guy who owns the circus, basically. He came up with the concept for it, allegedly. It's definitely been manipulated, but it was originally his idea. He's the one who funded it, and he was the one who organized the auditions and got together the core group of people who wound up coming up with all of the fabulous ideas for it. And it's a really kind of, there's a part in the interview at the end where the author says that Chandras felt very particularly real to her because she feels the way that he does when she's writing at times, that she's got like, you know, a bunch of different projects that she started and she can't quite let one go, even though it's time. She can't focus the way that she normally would. And what I found really kind of fascinating about the plot is that because the circus is the venue, and because the venue cannot cease to exist until the contest is over, everyone who has gotten involved with the circus is trapped in it until the contest is done. But they are not aware there is even a contest at all.
Mm-hmm.
And Marco has laid a binding on everybody in order to keep them from aging. They are still aging, he says, but much slower than they normally would. And these people are also unable to get sick. Like they're kept safe and healthy and protected from basically everything until the contest comes to an end, is what Marco intends, because he does not yet realize that somebody's going to have to die for that to happen. The only exception to this is a pair of twins that are born at midnight the night the circus opens. One is born right before midnight and one is born right after. And they wind up going by the names Widget and Poppy. And they each have kind of powers. Poppet, right.
Yeah, and they have magical abilities.
Yeah.
Of their own.
And
it's interesting because Widget was born first before midnight, and what he can see is people's pasts.
Mm-hmm.
And so he becomes a storyteller because he basically can look at a person and read their history right on them. And Poppet was born after midnight, and she sees flashes of the future. And I love it. Yeah,
it's a really fun idea, and they age normally. Yeah. So as time passes, they become part of the circus because they've learned their own skills from Celia, who teaches them how to manipulate things the way that she was taught by her father. And they also are able to train little tiny kittens to do amazing tricks, which is the best thing I've ever heard.
I know. They do somersaults.
I love it.
Because their parents do tricks with like big cats, with jaguars and stuff.
Right.
And snow leopards, only black and white cats.
Right.
Everything is black and white or gray.
So it's kind of, there's the main contest plot between Celia and Marco. And they don't really realize how high the stakes are, but they also, Marco has done a binding on everybody in the circus, and Celia has internalized a lot of the circus to the point that if something were to happen to her, the entire circus would completely fall apart. And you see little flashes of this as the story gets on, and things get more and more turbulent with her because she's realizing that she has feelings for Marco, and she finds out that one of them has to die and all this, that the circus isn't as flawless as it had been at one time, and things start going wrong here and there that hadn't before. And finally, Marco tells the fortune teller that he loves Celia and not her. And the fortune teller had laid a charm down on everybody and not said anything. And when he tells her that he doesn't love her and leaves, she undoes this charm. And like within moments of her undoing it, somebody gets stabbed to death. And the somebody is a man named Friedrich, who is like basically, he created the incredible clock that sits outside, and he is a devoted follower of the circus and writes about it in newspapers and everything. And he is part of the heart and soul of it, to be honest, just from a very different perspective.
And Celia becomes friends with him because she sees what he's written and she starts writing to him. And they become like pen pals. And he thinks she's just a fan of the circus too, because all of his writings have basically enticed other people to, how do you say the word that they became? Reviewers?
I do not know how to say it, to be honest. Let me type it into to Google and see what they say.
Because I don't speak French, and I can't imagine that I was pronouncing it correctly in my head. Right. But they basically are such fans of the circus that they start a network. And when somebody finds out where the circus is going to be next, if it's nearby, people go and travel to it. And they wear red scarves and only black or gray so that they can be noticed by other followers. And she becomes friends with him, and she actually develops this really beautiful friendship with him. So when that happened to him, I was doing my laundry. I was sitting outside waiting for it, and he gets stabbed, and I just closed the book, and I was like, I need a break.
Aww.
I was I was so sad and I wasn't expecting it, but I was like, I'm not going to cry. I'm sitting in public.
I couldn't, like, because the knife that gets thrown that winds up stabbing him to death had been intended for Alexander. And it was thrown by the man who created the circus. Basically, he gets pushed so hard towards losing his mind that a whispered word in his ear is enough to get him to go try and kill this guy. And he steps aside at the last second, like he knows the knife is coming towards him.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that he was going to have been talking to Celia's father, who is a ghost, and that it would go through him as well, and then into like a patron or something. But no, instead it winds up going into Friedrich, who is just the sweetest guy, who's just absolutely enraptured with the circus. I just want to watch a video on how to pronounce this word, and you're going to make me sit through a 30-second ad? Really?
Thanks, YouTube.
Rêveur. That's how you say it.
Rêveur.
Rêveur.
I cannot
do it again.
Do that throaty thing.
Rêveur. 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 I love that they do it 3 times. Thank you. Appreciate it. So, okay. When he dies, it's basically the beginning of the end of everything. Because Celia is so heartbroken, and because he was such an important part of the circus, because the performers are nothing without their spectators. And he represented the spectators. And the whole... This hit something personally for me, because I hate saying it. I'm just going to call them the dreamers. Let's just do that. Shall we just do that?
Sure.
The dreamers are this huge, basically bunch of groupies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really kind of sweet, because the people who run the circus kind of like give them like little VIP treatments here and there. Give them free food or free entry or different things like this if they wear the red.
Mm-hmm.
And these people create their own community with each other, where they get to talk about this thing that they love ad nauseum, and nobody thinks it's weird because they all love it too. Mm-hmm. And it really made me think of the Unspoiled community now. And there is an actual meetup happening, and people are going to fly to go to it. Mm-hmm. From Norway, somebody's coming from.
Shut up.
Yeah. And I'm just like, it really, when people are like, oh, I'd be nothing without my fans. It really is, though. Like, what's the point of this if there's nobody listening and participating? There is no point. Mm-hmm. There's nothing. There's the quote from the actual book, is a show without an audience is nothing after all. In the response of the audience, that is where the power of performance lives. And it is a commonly cited reason for a lot of actors who had been in movies. They go to the stage because there's an immediate energy surge from the reaction of the audience to whatever is happening, versus being in front of, unmoved cameras that just don't give a shit one way or the other, and having to do it over and over again.
It's also why a lot of theater actors struggle when they switch to film. Mm-hmm. Because they don't know how to act to camera. Mm-hmm. They're not getting a response necessarily from an actor every time. Mm-hmm. So it's really hard for those like close-ups when the camera's right on their face and they're supposed to be emoting, but they're like, I'm looking at a lens.
Right, yeah.
It's very hard. Some actors really struggle with that.
And it's when I was in high school and I was really into performing for the musical theater stuff that we did, my freshman year, I auditioned and I was going through the rehearsals and stuff, playing a character in Brigadoon. And I remember the first performance that we had, I went out onto the stage and I realized with everybody in the crowd, all of a sudden, now I was at 100%. I realized like in that moment, I had only been doing like 80%. And my drama teacher came up to me afterwards and actually said that, was like, oh, you wait until there's an audience. And I was like, I didn't know that I did that because I'd never performed before. And it explains so much why I love podcasting, because it's so, I don't get the immediate response because it's recorded, but it's still the knowledge that there are people listening to it. Like it's a different vibe versus doing something that would be, doing something like writing. Like I tried blogging for a while and I couldn't get it up. I just couldn't. I'd sit down in front of my computer and just be like, oh, my man. Oh.
Same.
You know? Yeah. Like I want to write what I want to write. Like I want to get my opinion out there, but it lacks that immediacy and that emotional extra something.
And when you podcast, you specifically too, you have somebody you're talking to. Mm-hmm. So you do get a reaction from your co-host, and you're also getting immediate feedback of like your ideas get validated or your thoughts are played off of, and so it's a tiny form of theater.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was just thinking about it after I finished the book today. I went for a walk and I was just like, in so many ways, you know, podcasting didn't exist like 15 years ago. I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I couldn't figure out anything that felt remotely like what I wanted because it didn't exist. And now I'm doing it and I can't even imagine doing anything else. Like I could get some, I could get some job to make ends meet, but it would never be anything beyond that for me. When it comes to what I want to do, this is it, you know?
Yeah, I completely 100% know exactly what that feels like. And I'm fairly new to this, but I've struggled for a really long time trying to figure out what it is that I want to do, what I'm good at. And I always knew like what I like doing is talking about TV. I don't know if I could write about TV, which I did think about doing when recaps were really big on the internet.
Right.
But being able to just dive into a show and talk about character, that filled a hole that I have been trying to fill with other things for a long time. And it made me stop stressing about like, I work at Starbucks. It's not glamorous. It's not a lot of money, but my job doesn't have to be the thing that fulfills me. And getting to do a couple of shows on Unspoiled, it makes me feel satisfied.
That's because Owen was talking about that, and it's just so, because he has this job that he doesn't love, but he has kind of reconciled himself to the fact that I don't have to do something I love for my job. I just want to be able to do stuff that I love when I'm not working. And for me, that's not enough. I am obsessive. I have to be doing it all the time, forever, always, just exactly the way that I want to do it because I'm a control freak and a perfectionist, and this is the way it is. But it's like he has recognized that for him, doing it this way is enough, and he's fine with that. And he doesn't feel the need to obsess over what am I doing with my life the way that I did, where for me, I knew that whatever I chose, that was going to be it. And I think in some ways that has been a little bit freeing for him to be like, yeah, I'm a janitor and that's not my whole life. That's fine. Yep, that's just what I do sometimes.
That's what I do to get a check, to be able to pay the bills. Yep. He's a Hufflepuff. I totally get it. We are on the same page. My boyfriend does what he's passionate about. You know, he works in TV. He doesn't want to do reality TV forever, but he enjoys it.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to make films. I think he wants to do documentaries more than anything, but he wouldn't mind getting into scripted too. And he's worked really, really hard to get to this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt really insecure because I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I went to pastry school. I thought I wanted to bake for a living. And as it turns out, I do not.
Mm-hmm.
That is something I do for me and to share. And when it became about money, it took away everything I loved about it.
That is the biggest thing that I think I try and warn people about, is because people are like, you know, just do what you love, what you would do if you weren't even getting paid for it. And I'm like, the thing is that once you start getting paid for it, that changes what it is to you.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it still works out. For me with podcasting, it's definitely changed it, but it's still what I love and it's fine. But
right.
Like you said, with the pastry thing, no, that was just ruined it. It was had lost its beauty for me. And that can happen with so many things.
It happened to me when I worked in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
Because the only thing I've ever loved my whole life is movies and television. I've always wanted to be a part of that world. And when I was, it was gross. It was dirty. It was about money. It wasn't about being nice to people. It made me hate TV. And I was like, I cannot do this.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot learn. I can't start to hate the thing I love. That's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
That ruins my whole life. And that's why when we moved here and I was like, well, maybe I'll try to get into film because Marvel shoots almost everything here. And I love Marvel. And then I took a step back and I was like, do I want to not love Marvel?
Right.
Because that's what'll happen.
Yep.
So I stopped.
That's really similar to me going into theater. And mostly for me with theater, I realized that I love performing, but I do not love the people in the theater community. They were terrible. And I didn't love musicals. Most of them are awful and insufferable. And I only performed in them because I needed to be performing. But in terms of what I was performing, I wasn't a big fan of it or anything. So I started, and they basically were like, well, if you want to perform, you're going to have to basically never eat, learn to dance even though you can't dance, and always get rejected and be fine with that. And then I was like, well, maybe I'm not cool with that. Maybe I'll do behind the scenes stuff with tech theater. And they were like, well, you're going to work about 75 to 80 hours a week. You will get no days off and you will never see the sun again.
And you won't make very much money.
You will make a lot of money if you decide to live somewhere where it doesn't matter that you make a lot of money, because you will be spending it all to live. So yeah, it's just the way that this whole thing is set up, with the performances being offset by the importance of the patrons, that we get little bits of this second person present tense, you are going into the circus and this is what you see scattered throughout the book. That even when you're with Bailey, who is the guy who winds up taking over the circus later, you're seeing everything for the first time. I just really appreciated that we get to see both sides of this, that it's not just about the performers, and that it's not just presented to us as a backstage look. We see the performances without any explanation for the magic that's happening. It's just happening. And you know that it's magic, but you don't know who's responsible for this one, because there's two people who could be doing it. And you don't know which part is magic and which part is just being an ingenious, like there's Mr. Barris, who's a mechanic, and he can make things that seem like magic but aren't. And I love that. You just aren't sure what is what, you know?
And Celia starts collaborating with him he makes things and she enhances them. So like he makes this carousel and then she makes the animals breathe.
Yes.
She makes them like real, kind of. And Marco figures out that she worked with Mr. Barris on that because he knew this is his work, but he can't make the Griffin breathe.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that she's clever enough, and her father hates it that she's working with someone else, but she knows, like, it can't just be me performing in front of a crowd and then, you know, making something wholesale. It's more interesting if I get to work with someone. And then there's the one later when Marco figures out that Celia has been working with Mr. Barris. He comes up with an idea where he creates a room that leads to a door, and she goes through the door, and then she creates a room, and they make this labyrinth together.
Right.
One responding to the other. And it's just so lovely. Yeah,
it's really, like, it's another kind of underline to the idea that these two mentors don't understand emotion and don't understand the bond between people, because they keep on emphasizing how important it is that they win by doing their own thing, and not understanding how much more spectacular something can be if they work together, and how they are basically only limiting themselves if they decide to constantly be in opposition to one another. So, yeah.
We should clarify that when they say one person has to die, it's not that the other one has to kill them.
Right.
It's that the other they are basically supposed to do all this magic until they physically cannot do it anymore, until they die from exhaustion. So this guy set his daughter up thinking, you know, she's better than everyone, she's going to win, but potentially she could die.
Yep. Because being better could mean that she chooses to lose. Because that's what winds up happening sometimes, and apparently is not an infrequent thing.
And is what she had decided to do. Mm-hmm. Because she couldn't bear for Marco to lose.
Yeah, either of them would have to live without the other, and neither of them can stand that. And Tsukiko is, throughout the story, kind of popping in here and there, saying things that give you the impression that she knows something. But it didn't occur to me that she had competed before.
Me neither.
I enjoyed that reveal because it felt like I should have known. But I just didn't think of it, you know?
Because we don't get a lot of explanation about previous challenges or when they happened. And because everybody is so spectacular in their own ways, it didn't occur to me either that what she was seeing, I thought she was just intuitive.
Yeah, I mean, because she has all of these symbols that are tattooed on her, so you kind of wonder if she has power because of that initially, you know? But that turns out to be a secondary thing, that her power came first and she wound up getting the tattoos later. And it's kind of... So this is what Tsukiko says when she's talking to Marco. Our instructors do not understand how it is to be bound to someone in such a way. They are too old, too out of touch with their emotions. They no longer remember what it is to live and breathe within the world. They think it is simple to pit any two people against each other. It is never simple. The other person becomes how you define your life, how you define yourself. They become as necessary as breathing. Then they expect the victor to continue on without that. It would be like pulling the Murray twins apart and expecting them to be the same. They would be whole, but not complete. And then tells him that her lover killed herself with fire, and that previously Tsukiko's own element that she was good with was water. But after her lover dies, now it's fire. Like, it was passed on somehow. Which I think
water,
is really
like,
beautiful.
rolls right off of her.
So she's just fundamentally changed now. And I just love that.
And Tsukiko also seems to know that both Celia and Marco are the competitors. And she's giving little nudges here and there for them to be pushed toward each other.
Mm-hmm.
She brings Celia to one of the midnight dinners.
Right.
And doesn't tell her. And God, these midnight dinners, I want to go to there.
I know, right? That was the moment when I was like, this moment is the one where I was like, oh shit, I love these books. So the next course arrives and Celia returns to listening and observing, in between trying to figure out if the meat disguised in feather-light pastry and delicate wine sauce is actually lamb or something more exotic. The dessert course halts the conversation entirely. Globes of thinly blown sugar sit on each plate and must be broken open in order to access the clouds of cream within. After the cacophony of shattering sugar, it does not take long for the diners to realize that though the globes appeared identical, each of them has been presented with an entirely unique flavor. There is much sharing of spoons, and while some are easily guessed as ginger with peach or curried coconut, others remain delicious mysteries. Celia's is clearly honey, but with a blend of spices beneath the sweetness that no one is able to place.
I want to eat that.
I know, right? I like, that was the moment where I was like, these books are fucking, like, this is just so wonderful. I just love it so, because, listen, don't get me wrong. I love gritty stories. I love realism. But sometimes you just need some beauty in the world. You just need something fabulous and fantastical and gorgeous that you can just allow yourself to lose yourself into without worrying that you're going to grab onto a thorn by accident and regret letting go that much.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, that's the thing with Neil Gaiman stuff, is that as beautiful as it can be at times, I can never relax because I know that there's something hidden there. There was a girl in my class when I was in theater school. We were meant to create a self-portrait with found objects. And this girl made a portrait of herself in 3 dimensions with cotton. But inside it, facing outward, were tons of needles. So if you put your hand on this cotton, like, ooh, fluffy, you get stabbed in the hand with like hundreds of tiny needles. And that's how I felt about his stuff, is that I want to put my hand on it and be like, oh, look, but I can't. I know I can't, because there's something in there that's going to fucking stab me. And this is the kind of thing where I'm not going to get stabbed. There's this enormous emotional component that's heartbreaking, but it feels like it is as much a part of the beauty as anything. It doesn't feel separate, and it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like a foil or a kind of undermining. It feels like they have to go together, because that's just how it works a lot of the time. You can't have like intense joy without intense pain resulting in some way, because everything has to end at some point. And that's just every reaction, right? Equal and opposite.
Yeah, and the things the heartbreaking things that happen actually push them closer together. Mm-hmm. Which, you know, the thing that happens with Tara.
Okay.
She realizes that they're not aging. Mm-hmm. She realizes something is weird. She goes to see Mr. A.H. Alexander, and then ends up stepping in front of a train.
Yep.
And it's presented as, did she mean to step in front of a train, or was that an accident? And I think it was an accident. I don't think she was trying to kill herself.
Same.
But I think he had something to do with her stepping in front of that train. Just like I think he had something to do with knowing that Chandresh was following him, and he stepped out of the way so that Friedrich gets killed instead of himself. Mm-hmm. So these little things are happening, and after Tara dies, they're all sad, and Marco and Celia draw closer together.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, it's balanced.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not somebody who like really is into romance in books. It feels very forced a lot of the time. It feels disconnected in a way. Like the author will expect me to take it on faith that they have just fallen for each other when I saw nothing to indicate that that would have happened.
Right.
But with these two, it's so understandable because they both are so isolated because of their abilities and their knowledge of this, you know, contest that's happening, that when you finally meet somebody who understands something that quite literally nobody else you have met other than your mentor understands or believes, then it's only natural that you would completely like lose it for that person beyond what anybody might understand ordinarily. And even ordinarily, that can still happen. Mm-hmm. So the two of them, I was really concerned, to be honest, at first. When Celia is becoming friendly with Friedrich, I thought maybe there was going to be a thing between the two of them. And I was thinking, is the story going to be that she is into Friedrich and not into Marco at all, and Marco is into her and not into, what is her name? Jocelyn?
Isabel.
Why did I come up with Jocelyn? Who's Jocelyn? And I thought that there was going to be this kind of like, you know, love square. And the fact that they wind up realizing that they are into each other, and Isabel pretty much is just like, yeah, I know you guys are meant for each other, and I've known it even though I've been in denial, and doesn't like, she does that charm, but it's in the heat of the moment in this like kind of desperate way. It doesn't feel malicious. It feels sad and desperate. Mm-hmm. And that she immediately regrets it and apologizes. It just, I didn't feel like the writer leaned so heavily on this romance to the point where I was getting irritated, because that's such a fucking pet peeve of mine, is that when writers don't know what to do, they create relationship drama. And like, nobody cares. Vampire Diaries. Just saying. I love that show. But there are times where it's just like, well, what do I do? Oh my God, whatever. There's a werewolf that you need to kill. Go deal. But it's just,
I've been really clear. I brought it up on the Lost podcast pretty early on that like love triangles are my least favorite trope, and the CW, every single show has a love triangle.
It's super lazy.
With the Vampire Diaries, I forgive it because I'm okay with whoever. Be with either one of them. It's fine.
That's honestly the one thing that saves me, because usually those kinds of triangles, I'm like, why would you even consider this other person? Mm-hmm. And in that show, I do get it. Yeah. Like, that's the one show that's been able to manage to make me go, yeah, well, I see what you're saying. Usually I'm just like, holy shit, shut up. They're a moron. Everyone knows they're a moron. Stop it. Yeah. Scandal. I'm looking at you.
I mean, every other show. Vampire Diaries is literally the only show with a centralized love triangle that I'm like, right. All right. I mean, I get it. Sure, either one. They're both great. I would. Either one.
But seriously, like, it's so tricky, and it's something that I get really paranoid about, because I almost feel like there's going to be parts of my book that I'm writing where people are going to be like, yeah, but your characters do want to have relationships, don't they? Because I'm just going to be avoiding that so hard that that's going to be conspicuous, that I'm like not doing that, even though naturally that's going to happen. People are going to meet and want to be together, and I'm just going to be like, nope, well, probably not. They're just going to fight all the time.
I'm not, I stopped trying to be a writer when I was like 12. My mom still wants me to be a writer. I'm like, it's not going to happen. I can never complete a story, which is my problem. But I know as somebody that's creative, you just got to let it go where it's going to go. So don't fight your characters if they want to be together. That's my advice.
Well, that's exactly my concern, is that they're going to want to be together, and I'm going to be like, oh, they do? That everybody else is going to see it, and I just won't see it, you know? It won't even be that I'm fighting it. It's just going to be that I'm so focused on something else that I won't see the thing that everybody else does care about, and I only don't care about it because I never care about that. So I think the key is to, you know, write good characters so that you do care even though you usually don't, like what she did here.
People are going to ship people no matter what you try to do anyway, so it doesn't matter.
You're right. It's true. Oh, I hate it.
Yeah.
Listen, it's actually funny because you said, like, you know, that you don't finish things. And in the interview at the end, they ask, what advice would you give to any aspiring authors out there? And she quotes Neil Gaiman, first of all. And she says, keep writing and finish things. It's simple, but the finishing things part is particularly important. I would also encourage any writer not to concern themselves too much with any supposed writing rules, because they're more like guidelines, and what works for one writer might not work for another. Also, remember to have fun with your writing. I need to remind myself that sometimes.
Good advice.
Right? But yeah, the finishing things, it astonishes me how frequently that is my complaint about a book or a movie or a TV show, is the ending. They just don't know where to go with it. Endings are hard.
I was really nervous with this book. Like, what if it's this perfect and then it ends really poorly? I was scared because I didn't know where it was going to go. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just going to throw names of TV shows out there. This whole episode is just going to be me going, you know what you did.
I mean, so many things just lose everything they've built with their ending. And I know that a lot of shows look back at other shows and how the, you know, uproar about how they ended makes other showrunners be like, okay, we have to do this right. And maybe that's a good thing, that fans can be so vocal right away that things are getting finished in a better way now. Because, you know, if Breaking Bad had ended differently, that could have ruined everything that came before it.
And a lot of people didn't like the ending. I mean, it's impossible to please everyone with an ending just as it is.
That is true. That is true. Those people are wrong, but that's yeah, my thing with not finishing is that I can start conceiving a story and then I just don't know where it's going to go. And I know it's one of my faults that if things start to become a little less easy for me, then I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Yeah, so speaking of the ending, they fall for each other. She first decides, Celia, that she's going to kill herself. Marco's like, haha, no, that's not what's going to happen at all. And he is about to let Tsukiko light him on fire. And just
before that, like, to back it up and give it a little more of the understanding, he has this book that has bound everybody together. And she steals it, and she's trying to figure out how he does his magic so that she can bind the circus to something else to try to save them both, and she can't figure it out.
Not only to bind it to something else, but someone else, because it actually takes like energy off of a person to sustain itself, it seems.
Yeah, and I think that she's thinking if she can bind it to someone else and have someone else take over the circus, then she and Marco, neither one of them will have to die. But she also spends a lot of time in the book alluding to, like, her father used to slice open her fingertips so that she could heal herself. But she's never been able to put someone else back together. And then her father did this thing where he turned himself basically into a ghost because he didn't bind himself to something in order to stay on this plane.
Right.
So she's trying to figure that out too. So then Marco's going to allow himself to be set on fire.
And she jumps into his arms like as he's getting lit up and manages to transport both of them out of there and into the plane that her father had tried to get into. It seems like her father didn't quite get to the spot that they're in because they're in a much more stable place than he had been.
She's a much better magician.
Right. And at first when she gets there, she's alone and she thinks that she lost Marco somewhere in the interim and she is completely freaking out. But he appears, he is there after all, and they are able to still see the circus and everything. Like it's a weird kind of ghostly, transparent presence that they can occasionally have physical contact with. He's able to actually touch things in particular that he made, and she is also able to. And they can still talk with people and stuff and be seen, but it's just a strange sort of existence, almost, but not quite as it had been, you know?
They're kind of transparent. People can see them, but they're sort of ghosts now too, but they're more substantial than her father was.
And everybody else appears like ghosts to them. So when somebody says something like, well, you're not real, they're like, well, you don't look real to me. So which one of us is right on that count? Which I liked. And yeah, as this happens, the fire, which Marco had been using as a conduit to keep an eye on everything in the circus and power it, goes out and everything freezes because that is what Celia did to kind of buy some time to keep it from falling apart. And it's taking an incredible amount of energy for her to hold everything in stasis while they try and figure out what the actual fuck they are going to do. Because if this circus falls apart, it's going to ruin a lot of people's lives. It has grown into this thing that is it's not as simple as a circus anymore. It's like an actual community, both for the people who perform and the people who love it. And for it to just disappear and not exist anymore, it would be a tragedy.
And there's a question of what would happen to all these people. Would they also just fade?
Right.
Like the twins have never known anything else. This is their home. It's the only home they've ever had, is this traveling circus. And they have these really strong abilities that she's been trying to teach them to use so that they can take over. But they need someone. I guess Bailey is like the substantial thing to bind the circus to.
Yeah, it's a really, so this is again part of what's so great about the way that she makes this circus so beautiful and lush is that you feel very viscerally that it would be a tragedy if it disappeared. It's not just because that's something that's, I can't count the number of books and movies where they want me to really care about the fate of something that I just cannot be bothered. And I don't understand why it means as much to them as it does either. And they're trying to save it. And I'm like, yeah, I guess. This is something that when I realize that it might just evaporate, I'm just like, oh my God. You know, there's just so much beauty there. And there's so many people who have been brought together because of it. And so much of a community built around it now that it's, and Bailey, who we've talked about a couple times, but if you haven't read the book, you won't know what the fuck we're talking about. Bailey is just another observer, but he sort of takes the place of Friedrich, who's murdered, as the observer who's in love with it. He's very young, and doesn't know what he wants to do with his life and feels like he doesn't belong on the farm at home, but he also doesn't want to go to college. And the circus appears, and all of a sudden he's like, oh, that's it.
Well, he has that experience with it when he's really young, when he's like 9 or 10. Maybe even younger than that. I don't know if they say how old he is, where his sister dares him to break into the circus during the day. And he goes there and he meets Poppet. And she helps him out, and she gives him a glove, and he spends the rest of his life longing for the circus to come back. And then when it does, he gets to spend time with Poppet and Widget, and they show him all these really fun tents that he's never seen before, and Poppet gives him a pass so that he never has to pay admission again.
Can I just tell you, the moment where he sees her and she recognizes him is the best. I just because, he hasn't seen her in 10 years probably.
Yeah.
And when he goes back in, he's not sure she'll recognize him, or if she does recognize him, it would just be kind of strange. Like when she does, he's so pleased, but he's also like, really? And then her and Widget want to hang out with him and walk around with him and show him everything. And he's just he has felt so completely isolated from anybody who understands what he feels. Like these two coming into his life with the ease that they do and the familiarity that they have when they're talking. It's like he finally belongs somewhere. And it is it's so well written because again, how many books have we read? How many Disney movies have we seen where I just feel like I don't belong anywhere? Oh God, whatever. Like it's hard to really feel that when your character is obviously crazy talented at something or super gorgeous or whatever. But we don't really get an impression of what Bailey looks like other than that he's kind of tall and gawky. He's not really particularly good at anything. So you understand much more why this would mean so much to him. Because there isn't any particular direction that feels obvious for him. And there's just two adults basically fighting over what he's going to do without consulting him at all. His father and his grandmother. But it turns out his grandma's just like, just don't do what your father says. That's all I ask. Which I love so much.
Go to Harvard, don't go to Harvard. I don't care.
Right? Just as long as you probably don't stay on that farm, if that's cool.
Don't stay on that farm. Yeah. And then he runs away to join the circus because Poppet gives him not an ultimatum, but she tells him that it's important, but it has to be his choice. And she doesn't explain to him why they need him because she doesn't entirely know why. It's one of those flashes she sees, but she says that, the future can change. So I think you're needed. And I don't know if the circus could go on without you, but you have to make the decision yourself.
Yep. Yeah, we all need somebody like that in our lives, guys.
Gone.
What's that?
When he goes back and the circus is gone, because,
oh my God.
We think it's because he took too long to get there. It's so sad on so many levels, because I was like, oh, poor Bailey. Now what? He just had this fight with his sister where he basically tells her to fuck off and he hates her. And,
right.
And then he shows up and the circus is gone. And then I'm like, well, what does that mean? Is the circus gone? Because everything's been ratcheting up to it's falling apart. I was
like the way that it worked out. I was just like, oh, Bailey, I'm so glad that you just carried on, because I would have turned around and gone home and not known what to do.
Yeah, when he's like, well, I'm just going to head to Boston and hopefully, try to figure out where the circus went. I have to find it.
Right.
And he runs into more of the dreamers who are like, oh, hey, we like the circus. Here, let me give you this scarf I've been knitting.
He's like, I'm trying to follow it. And they're like, oh, yeah. I mean, that's what we're doing. Like, he's acting like it's this crazy thing. And they're like, that's literally our hobby. Like, that's what we do. So sure, just climb on board with us and we'll take care of you.
Yeah, we hear it's heading towards New York. Just come with us. We'll figure it out. Don't worry.
And he had been thinking earlier when reading some fairy tales about how it's so shitty that there's never a young man who's spirited away by a fairy godmother or a handsome princess, and that he wishes that somebody would come and save him. And then that's basically what happens. Mm-hmm. So his love of the circus that's so deep and abiding is what it turns out kind of puts him in the right place at the right time to be the one who takes it over and keeps it alive, despite Celia and Marco no longer technically being alive in the way that they had been. Mm-hmm. And he, specifically says, I'm not special. And she's like, well, no, you're not. But even if you were, I don't think it would help. It's just that you are the one that's here and you love it the way that you need to love it to keep it going. So will you do this? And he agrees to do it. And that allows the circus to continue, and it allows Celia and Marco to actually be together, even though they're still trapped.
But they're trapped in the shadow version of the circus. Mm-hmm. So they're still where they love to be. Mm-hmm. And they've got it all to themselves, and they're together. And
they can actually touch, despite the fact that they're shadow versions of themselves. They can touch each other, which I was like, well, thank God, because I was about to be really upset.
Oh, God. There's so many, beautiful imageries in this book. The pirate ship made of books that's sailing on ink sea. Mm-hmm. So beautiful.
Yeah.
Just every little thing they make up. Even in that moment when Marco meets Isabel early on and he does what he does, where he manipulates what's around them. Mm-hmm. And it seems like they're in a forest all of a sudden.
Yeah.
It's just all so beautiful.
Yeah, there are some moments of things that I couldn't even think of. That I'm just like, where did you even think of? The clock, as it's described, and I'm going to find this, because Friedrich is the one who builds the clock that sits outside. It is the instructions that he was given as to what it should look like was dreamlike. And that's basically, that was it, right? Mm-hmm. And this man, Friedrich, it's again it's hard to know if it's simply fate, if it's simply people who really have a sense of who is right for the job. But Friedrich knows precisely what he means when he says dreamlike, and begins to build it, and just, yeah, there it is. That's I'm done. It's perfect.
And he initially is like, I've made it, you've got it. And he's done.
Right.
And he kind of forgets about it.
Yeah, he occasionally thinks about it, but when he reaches out to the man he sent it to, he doesn't really get much of a response on it. It's not until he finally hears that it's in his area, the circus, that he goes to see it, and he realizes that it's being kept outside, which kind of irritates him a little bit at first, because he's like, well, why didn't they tell me it was I would have put a different varnish on it. Come on, guys. But as it turns out, magic. So it's fine. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to find the part where he's built the clock. It turns out part 1 is just almost completely about Bailey, and our two magicians.
I know I marked it off.
Contortionist.
Nope,
yeah, this
is
killing me.
Night.
Okay, here it is. Oh no. This is way later. Oh well. I'll have to find it. But anyway, what kind of struck me about the clock is how much more intricate it was than anything that I could have thought of.
I found it.
You did?
Well, I found the chapter. What chapter? 88 is where it says dreamlike. So some part after that. Did you find it? Our
no,
books might be
go ahead.
slightly different.
Yeah, they're definitely different.
The face of the clock becomes a darker gray and then black with twinkling stars where the numbers have been previously. The body of the clock, which has been methodically turning itself inside out and expanding, is now entirely subtle shades of white and gray. And it's not just pieces, it is figures and objects, perfectly carved flowers and planets and tiny books with actual paper pages that turn. There's a silver dragon that curls around part of the now visible clockwork, a tiny princess in a carved tower who paces in distress, awaiting an absent prince. Teapots that pour into teacups and minuscule curls of steam that rise from them as the seconds tick. Wrapped presents open, small cats chase small dogs, an entire game of chess is played. At the center, where a cuckoo bird would live is in a more traditional timepiece, is the juggler. Dressed in harlequin style with a gray mask, he juggles tiny silver balls that correspond to each hour. As the clock chimes, another ball joins the rest until at midnight he juggles 12 balls in a complex pattern. After midnight, the clock begins once more to fold upon itself. The face lightens and the clouds return. The number of juggled balls decreases until the juggler himself vanishes. By noon, it is a clock again and no longer a dream.
Like, what? I would never think of any of that for a clock. I can't even picture it.
The pages that turn and the teapots and... Yeah.
I just can't, and this is because earlier we were talking about the fact that the rights were purchased for this book to be made into a movie, and nothing ever came of it. They were purchased in 2012, I think. It was a bit ago.
The book came out in 2011, and the rights were purchased by Summit Features or Summit Pictures, the same month that the book was released.
Okay, that makes sense. And it really, part of me wants to be I would love to see this on screen. And another part of me is I'm not sure anybody could possibly do this justice, because the reliance on CGI for things is so heavy that it can take away from the realism of the world. Mm-hmm. And you feel like you're just watching a crazy image. You're not watching an actual magical object or moment, You're just oh, look at this crazy thing they drew, which isn't really the same. So I'm very curious if they ever do this, how they'll handle it. Because this is the kind of book visually that could go the way of the Golden Compass, where all they seem to care about is how it looks. And the whole soul of it is lost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I hated that movie.
Oh my God, it's so bad. So it looks gorgeous, but it's terrible.
I didn't even finish it.
The movie?
Yeah.
I think I fell asleep. I think, because I remember how it ends. But, yeah, that's it. I don't remember it, in between. So I feel like I fell asleep and then woke up and it was ending. And I was like, oh, all right.
Which is not what you want with a story like that.
No, it is not.
Yeah, I'm afraid. I honestly hope this never gets made into anything, because I don't think that anybody is capable, at least not the people currently in Hollywood. I don't think anyone's capable of doing it justice on any level. They'll ignore. They'll try to amp up the love story too much. Mm-hmm. It won't be what the true story is, and they wouldn't get the details right.
Yeah.
So
this is the kind of thing that I think would really do well as an illustrated edition, like the Harry Potter book.
Mm-hmm.
They did something like that. That would be fucking gorgeous.
Yeah.
But I don't want to see it in action. Nothing could be as good as what's in your head with something like this.
Yeah.
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 Get an illustrated edition there, Aaron Morgenstern. Work on that. Find some illustrator to do that. Jim Kay, who is doing the Harry Potter ones, he might be good. I'm sure he's quite busy. He's got a book a year for the next 5 years to do.
I really need to get those.
They're so pretty.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is such a long book that I can't imagine like how thick the illustrated edition would be. That's what I'm worried about with like the coming Harry Potter books that get so long.
Right?
How giant are those going to be when they're illustrated? Like, Jesus.
Because it's still all the text, right?
Oh yeah, it's the complete book. It's just yeah.
Oh God, can't even. I mean, The Goblet of Fire already is such a fat book.
Yeah. From the interview at the end, I really like the interview was actually quite fun because she really sounds like somebody who, in some ways, like accidentally fell into this amazing story without intending it to. So they ask, how did you go about creating this very intricate world and colorful inhabitants? She says, I created it by accident, really. I was working on a different story that wasn't going anywhere, and I was feeling frustrated and bored with it. So out of desperation, I sent my characters to a circus. The circus was immediately much more interesting. It appeared in my head with lots of tents and a bonfire in the middle, but it took me a long time to figure out its story. I tried to make it my ideal entertainment space, something between theater and museum, something to be explored instead of watched, and then I gave it my favorite color scheme. I started adding characters as they were needed before I knew what roles they would play. Marco was created because I knew Chandris wouldn't be writing down his own notes. I had no idea how important he would be when he turned up in my imagination in his bowler hat. I wrote the book the same way you might get to know the circus as a guest. First came the place itself, then meeting the people within it, and only after I'd visited every tent and consumed a great deal of chocolate-covered popcorn did I figure out the story behind it all. And that was when she says that she's like really close to Chandris as a character, that Poppy and Widget were the first characters she came up with before she even knew what the story was, which I thought was really interesting, right? And they said, we see Bailey in the midst of a conundrum about what his future holds and which path he should follow. Did you always know that you wanted to be a writer? And she says, I didn't want to be a writer when I was growing up. Sometimes I'm still surprised that I am. Which is just so, like, I just love that so much. And I studied theater in college, and in retrospect, it was very helpful for my writing because I direct stories like plays in my head, which I'm just like, yeah, son. Everything in my head is a movie. Even my dreams are like movies. It's fucking terrible. So yeah, she sounds like a lot of fun. I would like to sit down and chat with her.
I read a recent blog post of hers when I looked her up on Amazon, when I looked to see if there were any other books.
Mm-hmm.
Amazon does this cool thing where it'll have links to stuff about the author, and it led to her website, which I want to actually explore a little bit more. And she had this whole post about the new year and what how shitty last year was for everyone, and what she's been doing, and she and her husband just moved into a place, and just her blog post was so warm and inviting. And she had this whole list of, she's like, I don't watch a lot of TV, I don't really watch movies, but I love music, so here's a bunch of music that meant a lot to me this year. And it was just so interesting. She definitely seems like a really interesting person, and she did say she's been working on another book, but she's just been struggling, which is what happens. Especially when you write such an amazing first book. I would imagine your next one, there's so much pressure from agents and publishers to, live up.
As somebody who sometimes feels like I peaked in high school, that is utterly terrifying to me. I cannot imagine the kind of, like, oh my, just kill me. That's why you never write again. That's why there are authors that are just like hermits, that everybody's waiting for their next novel and it never happens. Because why? Why would you do that to yourself?
And sometimes you have this amazing first novel like The Time Traveler's Wife. And then the next one that comes out, which I still haven't read because it didn't sound interesting and it had pretty mediocre reviews, where I was like, God, that first one was so beautiful. I don't think I want to lose respect for the writer.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And it kind of gives me a little bit of understanding about George R. R. Martin, and I have to just sit back and be like, okay, dude, just take your time. Write the book.
With him, it's not even like I've gotten to the point where I'm just like, fine, it's never finishing. That's fine. Like, if it comes out, I will just I'll be delighted, but yeah. I'm just going to pretend that is never going to happen. And I've reached a point where I'm okay with it.
I've stopped being angry at him. Now I'm just like, hey, writer's block is a bitch. I get it. But also maybe say no to stuff once in a while.
Right.
You know, yeah. give and take, dude. I get it. You're famous now. It's fun.
It's not just, though, that it's fun. It's that when you are terrified, that's what you do, is you just do everything but what you're supposed to be doing. Like, I'm not a writer in that I've ever published anything. I'm a writer in that I'm just trying to, like, bang this friggin' story out. And I will have the house cleaned from top to bottom before I sit down to write. Because I will do anything to keep from sitting down to write. As much as I act like I just wish I had more time to do it. No, I don't. I wish I had more time to organize my sock drawer while I pretend that I wish that I was writing. When in fact, I'm just fucking terrified to sit down and realize I have nothing to say. That's a terrifying thing to realize about yourself, that you have nothing to say. Thankfully now I do, but there was a long period there where I didn't know what the fuck was happening.
That's writer's block.
Yeah. It's the worst. It makes you feel like you're such a bore. It makes you question everything about who you are, like, fundamentally as a person. You're just like, my life is a lie. I am a fraud. Nobody should listen to me. Nobody should read my work. Like, it's just... It's rough, man. There's something particular to writing specifically that is painful in that way. And I don't know why it is. Maybe it's because it's frozen in time forever. But so is podcasting. Like, there's some shit that I have said that was idiotic that is out for everyone to listen to from like 4 years ago. And I think back and I'm just like, God, I was dumb.
Oh, don't pull a George Lucas and go back and like re-record.
Oh my God. Can you imagine that? I just don't understand why people love this character. She's great. And everybody's like, what just happened? Misa, love this character.
Oh God. Second time this week that character has come up to me. Enough. I don't acknowledge those movies exist.
My friend Sydney is wonderful and has, like, artistically great taste when it comes to visual art. But in terms of movies, she just doesn't, like, she cannot be trusted. And she loves Jar Jar.
Oh, God.
Literally the only person I've ever met who likes Jar Jar. And I just didn't know what to say to her. I just stopped and stared at her and she started giggling hysterically. And I was like, you what? And she's like, I don't know why. I just do. And I'm like, I can't even talk. What? Yeah.
The worst thing to ever happen in the history of cinema.
Oh, just thinking about it makes my teeth hurt a little bit.
I wanted to jump back to when you were reading what she was saying about writing this book, to this answer that's on her blog, where she said that in the first draft of this book, when she was doing it on NaNoWriMo, the entire, she says, 100K worth of original Circus stuff, Celia isn't even in it.
Yes. Yeah. She was like, she said she didn't know anything about who Celia was and was having a really hard time getting a handle on her. And that, this sounds super familiar. Like, the series that I'm writing, there are 2 characters in the first version of this book that are completely gone. And they were main characters. And they are gone. There is a storyline that I just dropped. And there are 2 new people who are absolutely crucial now that did not exist. It's like the way that she, in the acknowledgments at the end, not even the interview, but just her acknowledgments, she calls the book a mess. I'm trying to find where is it? Oh yeah, here it is. Okay. There were a number of associates and conspirators behind the book, and I owe them a great deal of gratitude. First and foremost, my agent, Richard Pine, who saw potential in something that was once a truly god-awful mess and believed in me every step of the way. Yo, that spoke to me on a spiritual level. Like, when you're writing and you know there's something there, you're like, it's here somewhere in this fucking garbage fire that I've somehow written. If I can find where is it though? Oh man, I feel you. I mean, I think that's just part of the process, but I always felt like that was just me being a bad writer. The more I read about the process of writing, that's just like how it goes a lot of the time, right? Where you're just like hoping that this is something. Mm-hmm. It's just like, I'm gonna keep writing this until it turns into anything and hope for the best, kind of. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, my thing was they never turned into anything, so I stopped. I wrote 2 pieces of fan fiction that I actually put on a website. They were both Harry Potter. I was proud of both of them. They're the only 2 things that I've ever put out there for people to actually be able to read.
I put out a thing and retracted it all. I was like, nope, I take it all back. This never existed.
I actually went to see if the website that I'd posted them on still existed, to see was that as good as I thought? And I found them, and they're pretty good. I was all right with it.
Nice.
But it wasn't my world. I didn't create it. I just played with characters that existed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I can do that, but making my own stuff, creating, I wish I could. I wish I could.
Mm-hmm.
Because that, I think, would be really satisfying, just building a world myself. But nope, I don't have it in me.
Yeah, it's I'm finally getting into that process now, and it's kind of, I'm realizing that I'm going to have to write a bunch of this stuff down in a separate thing that probably won't ever make its way into the final novel, because my brain just goes off on these tangents that are really not relevant to anything, but I have to get them out of my head or else they'll cloud my thinking on everything else. It's sort of like I just have to get them out of the way, like a pensive kind of thing, you know? Just take the thought out, put it somewhere, get it out.
Yeah. You never know that could, stuff like that could turn into something too.
It's that's part of why I want to put it somewhere, because I'm like, maybe. Again, just hope this is anything.
Do you have
sending you a link
Bible?
to an awesome illustration of Poppet and Widget, because I think it's pretty cool.
Do you have a story Bible for your book?
What I'm using is Scrivener, and it lends itself very much to building something like that. I don't have one yet.
Because a friend of mine is writing a novel, I think. And he posted something on Facebook the other day where he was like, note to self, make sure you put down what type of alien it is before you start writing about them and you realize that you've completely mixed them all up.
Yeah, that's 100% a thing that's happened. I've described somebody as looking a certain way and then realized that was not. Or I'll be like, oh, they're from this town. And previously I said they were from a completely different country. Yeah. Yup. I know that feel, bro.
Yep. You have to build yourself a story Bible so that you can keep track of who your people are and what your ideas are, and just make sure it's malleable. You can change what needs to be changed as you change things. I lost that sentence. I started looking at Puppet and Widget, and I completely lost my sentence.
Oh my god, that was amazing. So that you can change what needs to be changed as you change things. It's like you were in the middle of the sentence when you realized, I just have to finish this sentence. I can't undo what I've done.
This illustration.
Anyway.
Apparently there was talk of her making a tarot. Like
That'd
the one
be
she describes,
awesome.
but it hasn't really gone anywhere, she said. But that would be cool. I used to collect really cool tarot decks. I don't know how to use them, but I love them. And I don't know where they are now, but I did have a Lord of the Rings one at one point because, you know.
Oh my God.
It's me.
Nerd! I had a set given to me by one of my mother's drum circle friends upon my first menstruation.
I just took a sip of water and I almost spit it out.
Yep, they presented it to me wrapped in a piece of silk with a bloodstone sitting on top of it. Yeah, this is my life. I was 11. No, I was 9 when I got my period the first time. That's right. I was really young. Yeah. And it was the creepiest tarot. I gave it away. I couldn't use it. It freaked me out. It was not the traditional one that most people use. I can't remember the name of it. But it was in these like vivid, like indigos and blues and blacks. And there was something about it that gave me an icky feeling. And I just didn't, I gave that shit away.
Well, then it wasn't. I mean, if tarot is real, I don't know that it is, but the people who believe it. That's just not your deck. It's not right for you.
Right, yeah. That's what my mom said. She was like, we'll find you one that you'll like. I was like, well, I mean, I guess. I don't really care, but sure.
I just find them really interesting. I don't believe in fortune telling. So the, science or whatever behind tarot means nothing to me, but the artwork can be so spectacular on those decks. Mm-hmm. And I worked in a bookstore and we had all kinds of, different variations. And I was just fascinated with the art on them. So I think I had like 4 or 5 different decks. Never used them. I don't know how to use it.
I'm like really, I'm somebody who like is super skeptical, but I've had a couple people read my decks when I was younger that were so dead on that it was like, they knew that I was getting scholarships that I had not gotten a letter at the time. They knew that I was going to be moving. One of them knew that I was going to break up with Brendan. And I realize it now, even though she didn't say it, she was like looking at him in this weird way and looked at me in this weird way. And then she said something very cautious, like, you two are friends more than anything. And now I'm like, oh yeah, she saw some shit and she just was trying to be super tactful about that. But yeah, a few things that I've just been like, that's weird. I go into it very much like eye rolly, but
where I've never had anybody do it where I'm like, oh yeah, that shit tapped into something there that's freaking me out. Like I think it would freak me out because mostly, you see fortune teller or like in LA, there's psychics everywhere, little psychic shops everywhere. I just don't believe any of that stuff.
Yeah, it wasn't the kind of thing that freaked me out in the moment because I didn't know whether a lot of what they were saying was accurate at the time. It was later. And that's kind of the thing with fortune telling is like, with Poppet, she doesn't know what she's seeing at the time until it's too late. And you'll be reading like, Isabel's reading the tarot decks and she can kind of tell, but the timing is off or things like that. And that's what it was like getting them read, is that at the time they'd be telling me something and it doesn't mean anything to me. And I'm like, I mean, I guess. And then later I'm like, oh, like I had that reading when I was, I think 17, 18. And I asked her what I was meant to do. And she said, you're meant to make people laugh. You're supposed to be able to bring humor to situations that are really upsetting and serious and make them laugh. Even
and you
though
didn't become a stand-up comic?
I genuinely thought that was the only option. I was like, maybe a comedian? Is that one? But it didn't feel right. And I didn't do it because I couldn't figure out what the hell that could even mean. And now that I'm doing this, I'm like, oh, well, that actually really does apply, doesn't it? But at the time, it just like, I can't do anything with that information. It's not helpful. So that's really the main thing is people want to get their fortunes read. But even if it does work, I don't think it matters that you got it read because it's not going to change your choices. It's not going to change or help you decide on anything because it doesn't make sense until retrospect. And so the whole point behind it is moot, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they could just be Trelawney.
Or they could just be poor Trelawney. Poor Trelawney who desperately wants to believe that she has power to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sweetie. Sweetheart. Angel. All right. Well, I think that's everything. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up on this?
No, because otherwise I would just be reading passages from the book. I think everybody should read this book. It's so good.
Yeah, I
want to read it again.
Completely understand what you mean by that. There were a couple like in particular spots that I was like, I know I'm going to have to read this, but I had to be very like choosy about it because it got to the point where I was like, for Christ's sake, I'm picking everything here.
I started going through the book this afternoon and I was just like putting tabs. I'm like, it's every chapter. I'm just marking off every chapter.
Right.
Because it's just, there's something in every single section of the book that is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the really great things about this story is it doesn't go linearly. So I don't know. Everything sort of feels like little stories that are being told in between this bigger story.
Right.
And I really liked that. One of the criticisms that I'd seen, like a one negative review I read on Amazon, was somebody who was like, "Oh, it just fell apart at the end."
What?
Like, what did you read?
I mean, if you mean literally the circus fell apart at the end, it started to. Like, I don't even know what you're saying there.
No,
I'm sending
they were
you
like,
another picture.
They were like, the
Tsuchiko.
story was really good, and then it just ended up going nowhere. And I was like,
what were they expecting to happen? Because I got more than I expected.
Yeah, I don't know. And so this is why I don't read reviews of things until after I've read something, especially books and movies, because I don't want someone else's opinion to get in my head while I'm reading something. I don't want to read a book and wait for it to fall apart. Yeah,
that's why I don't watch trailers and stuff anymore, because they really influence how I watch something later on. I've realized I'll listen to people's podcasts or read things after I've seen something and before I record, because that can sometimes open up my mind to other ideas about something that I've already taken in. But beforehand, absolutely not. That's just like, no.
Yeah, I've learned that even my friends, if I see their opinions of a movie I haven't seen yet, it'll influence me a little bit, or I'll be waiting for like, oh, why did so-and-so think this was so terrible? Like movies, I'll watch the trailers because whatever. The trailer it just gets me excited, or it doesn't. But actually, like, seeing what people think of something, I have to wait until later to read anybody's thoughts on anything.
I've been burned by too many trailers, man. I get so excited over trailers and then it's nothing. Ugh,
yeah, I mean, that happens. But I enjoy getting excited, like how I picked apart the new Game of Thrones trailer, because I was like, this makes me happy.
Yeah, that one I haven't seen. Oh, yeah, man. The one that I always cite as like my example of being so disappointed is the trailer for Prometheus that I just got so psyched up over, and then it was nothing. It was worse than nothing. It was a mess.
I like Prometheus.
I'm okay. Podcast over. Thanks for coming, everybody.
I don't know.
I sent you an awesome model of the circus that somebody made with the swirls of black and white on the ground, which I forget are a thing. And look at how crazy that looks. I love it so much.
Oh, I actually never pictured it as swirls.
Me neither. But I kind of love it. I
don't picture the ground. I had a really hard time picturing the circus itself because it seemed like all the tents were connected, but they're not. This is actually a better interpretation. I want to go.
I know, right? Somebody do this. This would make an amazing party theme. I might have to do something like that.
Great party.
We did a Gatsby party for New Year's last year, and it was the bomb. So I kind of think if we saved up enough money for a couple years, we might be able to pull off something approaching as awesome as this, because my friend Sydney's apartment is like, it's a loft with this amazing, it could actually pull something like this off, which I don't know of anybody who has a house that could work for something like this. So thanks, Sydney, for having great taste in a place that nobody could have made look great, frankly.
We used to have theme parties when I lived in LA all the time. And like, one time we had a poker party and everybody had to dress in black, white, or red.
Nice.
That was fun. And a friend's going away party, he was moving to New York, so we decorated everything like the subway and with Met stuff and Jet stuff, because those were his teams. And
awesome.
Played only songs that were about New York, and I wrote on every single cup a song title that had to do with New York or song lyrics that had to do with New York. Yeah, we used to do that shit like every weekend. It was exhausting.
I used to do that shit. That sounds exhausting. Like once a year is enough for me.
It wasn't every weekend, but it was a lot. Anytime we had a reason to throw a party, it turned into a theme.
Man.
My going away party was ocean themed because I was moving to Rhode Island. So everybody came dressed in some sort of maritime wear. Some guys were dressed like douchebags, and I was dressed like a sailor, and someone was a mermaid. It was crazy. It was awesome.
Oh, you. I was just like a mermaid. I want to be a mermaid.
Me.
No, I know. I was thinking about because that's my hair would just lend itself to that right now.
Yeah.
But
true. It's not maneuverable though to be a mermaid.
That's true. All right. Well, I think that's everything.
I think so.
Thank you, madam, for joining me, and I'm really glad that you liked it as much as I did. There are some people who said that they didn't like it, and I frankly just don't know what to say to you because I can't relate to that in any way, and I just don't really feel like I understand you fundamentally as a human being. So, it's fine.
You're very cut and dry.
It's
black and white.
There are things that I do get why people wouldn't like them, and yet I do. But this is something that I genuinely am like, what's not to like? Come on, But
I feel the same way. That's why I couldn't stop talking about how great this book was. And Jason was like, I'm going to read it. Like, I didn't think I don't know. I love it. I can't stop talking about how great it is.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad that, I was a little stressed about finishing it in time because I waited until the last second. But I'm kind of glad that I did because I just wanted to talk about it immediately after finishing it. And it would have been hard to, sit around and wait for everything to finish.
Yeah.
For the time to wind down. So
what's the next book?
The next book for August is The Girl with All the Gifts.
Right. I started that months ago, and it was very good. There's a movie too.
Yeah, I've seen the posters for that, which threw me off because it's apparently a book about something much different than what I had thought it was going to be about.
What did you think it's about?
I had no idea. I thought it was going to be about an X-Man or something. And apparently she's a zombie or something. So that was startling, but I'm interested. So there's that. And yeah, I'm just really, I'm excited because it's a book that a lot of people had a strong reaction when I said that I was considering covering it. People were like, yes. So I think that one, out of all of the ones this year, that one was the number one most upvoted. Huh. There were others that were very high, but that one was, I think, number one. So yeah, that's what's coming out in August. Woo!
All right. Well, that should be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for listening. And
thank you.
Let us know what you thought of the book if you read it. And if you didn't like it, tell us why you're a godless heathen. And we will see you next month. Why you have
no soul.
Right? And we will see you next month with a new book. Girl with All the Gifts. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
Network podcast.